Night has settled gently over the land, not with a sudden hush, but with a soft agreement between sky and earth. The wind has found a resting place. The trees stand without urgency, and the moon, pale and patient, moves slowly behind thin veils of cloud. This is the hour when the old stories wake. Not loudly, not all at once. They rise the way mist does, quietly, from the ground itself. Long before clocks measured time, and long before roads cut through forests, the Celtic lands believed that night was not an ending, it was a doorway, a moment when the world grew thin, and what was unseen could draw closer without disturbance. In Ireland, in Scotland, in places where stone circles still lean into the wind, people spoke of a time between times, a space where humans walked beside mystery, not to conquer it, but to live gently alongside it. These were not stories of heroes shouting across battlefields. They were stories told beside hearth fires, under heavy cloaks, as rain touched the roof and sleep crept closer. They spoke of quiet hills where the Sidhe, the fair folk, lived beneath the earth, not Shane creatures of fantasy, but ancient beings, bound to stone, water, and tree. They told of druids who learned wisdom by listening longer than they spoke, of animals who carried knowledge older than language, of forests that remembered every footstep and forgave most of them. Tonight, you are not here to learn. You are not here to remember. You are here to rest. There is nothing required of you, no meaning to extract, nor lesson to hold on to. The stories will move at their own pace, like a river that does not mind being watched. Imagine now that you are walking along a narrow path where grass brushes softly against your feet. The air smells of damp earth and pine. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once, and then the forest returns to silence. You come to a place where standing stones rise from the ground, their surfaces cool and worn. They have been here for a very long time. They do not ask your name. They do not need it. As you settle into this space, the world loosens its grip. Thoughts wander, breath deepens. The mist grows thicker, not to hide the way, but to soften it. Each story you hear tonight belongs to this land of fog and moonlight. You may follow them, or you may drift away from them. Both are welcome. The forest will keep speaking, whether you are awake to hear it or not. When you are ready, or even if you are not, the first story begins. There was a hill on the edge of the village that never quite belonged to the day. Sheep grazed there in the morning, and children crossed it on their way home. Yet, as evening came, the place seemed to draw inward, as if keeping something to itself. The elders called it the Sidhe Hill. Beneath it sat a woman. She wore no cloak, yet the air did not trouble her. Her hair was pale, not with age, but with something harder to name. In her hands, she worked strands of grass into a cord. Ian stopped. The hill felt full, not crowded, but present. "You've come a long way," the woman said, without lifting her eyes. "I live nearby," Ian answered. "That is not always the same thing," she replied. She gestured to the ground. Ian sat. Time passed without shape. The mist moved around the hill, rising and thinning, touching stone and grass alike. The woman continued her work. Ian thought of his sheep, of home, yet no worry followed the thought. The hill seemed to hold those things for him, as one might set aside a coat until it is needed again. At length, the woman tied the cord. She placed it at the base of the hawthorn and stood. "Remember where you are," she said. Then she walked down slope and was lost to the mist. Ian remained until the light faded. When he rose, the hill felt empty in the ordinary way. The hawthorn stood as it always had. The path home lay clear before him. The sheep waited at the field's edge, untroubled. From that evening on, Eon noticed small changes. Mist never confused him. He found lost animals without searching far. And when he crossed the hill at dusk, he felt acknowledged. Years later, others spoke of seeing lights there or hearing music. Eon said nothing. He knew the hill did not belong to stories told aloud. It belonged to listening. And so it remains. The Sidhe hill stands, watching the land breathe, waiting for those who arrive without demand. At the far edge of an oak forest, where the land rose gently and then levelled again, there stood a circle of stones. They were not tall, they were not shaped by any careful hand. Each one leaned in its own direction, as if placed by thought rather than force. The people of the nearby valley passed the place often. Some left offerings, some avoided it. Few stayed. One man returned each day. He was a druid, though nothing in his appearance marked him as such. His cloak was worn thin. His staff was plain ash wood. Those who knew him said he learned more by standing still than others learned by asking questions. Each morning he entered the stone circle and placed his palm against one stone, never the same stone twice in a row. He rested his weight there until his breathing matched the air around him. The stones had been standing longer than memory. They had watched trees rise and fall. They had felt frost split their surfaces and moss claim their edges. They did not speak, but they remembered. The Druid believed this was enough. He did not come to ask favors. He did not come to change the land. He came to listen. One year, the forest grew unsettled. Streams shifted their course. Animals wandered into the valley at odd hours. The birds fell quiet before dusk. The people felt it, though they could not name it. They came to the Druid and asked what must be done. He did not answer. Instead,
he asked them to walk with him. They stood among the stones as the day passed. Some grew restless, some grew tired. A few remained. As the light faded, the wind moved through the circle and then moved on. Leaves settled. The ground seemed to release a held breath. The Druid touched one stone and then another. "These stones have carried weight," he said. "They remember balance." The people did not fully understand, but they returned to the valley and spoke less in the forest. They took only what was needed. They walked the old paths. In time, the streams found their beds again. Animals returned to the deeper woods. The birds resumed their songs. The Druid continued his visits. Years passed. The stones weathered. And though no one could say what the Druid learned from them, the land remained steady as long as he listened. Some say that if you stand there now, with your hand against the stone, and wait long enough, you may feel something settle within you. Not an answer, just a sense that nothing is being asked of you. There is a path that appears in the forest only when the moon reaches a certain height. It does not mark itself in daylight. No track remains when morning comes. Yet animals know where it lies. The path runs between old trees, where roots lift the soil and stones press through fallen leaves. At night, the ground there carries a faint, pale tone, as if remembering light. A fox walked this path. Its coat changed with the seasons, red in autumn, darker through winter, thin and bright again in spring. It did not hunt along the path. It did not hurry. The fox treated the path as one might treat a familiar place. Creatures who strayed from their range sometimes found the fox waiting. A deer stalled by fog, A badger turned from its set by flooding rain. A young owl grounded before its wings were ready. The fox would walk ahead. Those who followed did not question why.
The path did not lead everywhere. It led only as far as was needed. At certain points, the pale ground faded and the forest resumed its usual shape. The fox never crossed beyond those points. One night, a child from the village followed the moon further than intended. The forest grew unfamiliar. The air carried the scent of wet bark and stone. The child did not cry out. Instead, they sat on a fallen trunk and waited. The fox appeared from between the trees and stopped a short distance away. It looked once at the child, then turned and stepped onto the pale ground. The child followed. Branches parted, roots lowered. The forest seemed arranged differently along the path, as if offering passage. When the child reached the edge of the woods, the pale ground faded. The fox did not turn back. It stood just long enough to be seen, and then stepped away from sight. The child returned home with mud on their shoes and leaves in their hair. Sleep came easily that night. In the years that followed, the child wandered the forest often, but never felt lost. They learned when to stop walking. They learned when to wait. Some still see the fox on clear nights, moving where the moon rests longest. Others say the path no longer appears. Both may be true. The forest does not repeat itself exactly. It remembers what it needs to remember and releases the rest.
In a valley where mist gathered more often than rain, there lived a woman who knew the forest as one knows a long companion. She did not remember when this knowing began. There had been no moment of learning, no sudden change. The forest had simply always been there, and she had always listened. Her home stood at the boundary between field and wood, built of stone taken from the riverbed and roofed with timber long since darkened by weather. Ivy climbed its walls, and she allowed it to grow unchecked, believing that walls, like people, should be allowed to breathe. Each morning she stepped beneath the trees before the valley fully stirred. She walked paths shaped by animals and water, not the straighter tracks made by men. She carried nothing in her hands. There was nothing she needed to bring. She greeted the trees as she passed, not with words, but with touch. Her palm rested on bark, fingers tracing grooves carved by age and wind. Each tree had a weight to it, not heaviness, but presence. She felt this clearly. The forest answered in its own way. Branches shifted during storms, yielding rather than splitting. Roots tightened their hold in soil when rains pressed hard. The woman never claimed this as skill or gift. She believed the trees were simply glad to be noticed. Villagers spoke of her with respect, edged by uncertainty. They noticed that animals lingered near her dwelling, that birds nested low in the branches above her roof, that fallen limbs near her path showed no rot. When they asked her what she did in the forest, she smiled and said very little. As years passed, her steps shortened. She rested more often, leaning against trunks she had known since they were young. She learned which trees bore weight and which preferred not to. The forest adjusted to her pace. One winter, a storm crossed the valley with no warning signs. Wind tore through the upper branches. Rain pressed the ground until it yielded. Trees fell. Paths vanished. When the storm passed, the villagers searched the forest. They found the woman seated at the base of an old oak, her back against its roots, her hand resting where bark met earth. She was alive, breathing evenly, as if the storm had passed around her. The oak stood untouched. Around it, the land lay broken and scattered, yet its roots held firm, deep and unwavering. The woman did not leave the forest again. She was buried where the trees thinned into meadow, as she had once requested. No marker was set. The land did not need one. In the seasons that followed, the oak changed. Its branches spread wider, its leaves grew thicker, casting deeper shade. People paused beneath it, without knowing why they stopped there.
Storms crossed the valley again in later years. The oak held. Other trees bent around it, their branches shifting as if guided. Those who rest beneath that tree now sometimes feel a sense of being accompanied, not watched, not remembered, simply held within something older than worry or thought. The forest continues. Trees fall, others rise, and in the valley where mist still gathers, the land remembers how to stand.
Beyond the last line of trees, where the forest thins and the ground turns uneven, there lies a lake that does not appear on any map. Those who find it do so without planning. Those who search for it rarely succeed. The water rests in a shallow basin of stone, dark even under open sky. Reeds line its edges, but they do not crowd the shore. The surface remains mostly untouched, as if movement were a choice the lake does not often make. The Sidhe were said to gather there in times before memory was divided into years. They did not come to meet one another, they came to remember the land as it had once been. A fisherman from the valley reached the lake one evening after following a stream farther than usual. His basket was empty. His thoughts were tired. When he saw the lake, he felt no desire to fish. He sat on a flat stone near the shore and watched the lake hold the sky. The reflection did not match the clouds above. Stars appeared where none yet shone. The fisherman noticed this without surprise. Time loosened. The air felt unchanged, yet the world beyond the lake seemed distant. The fisherman listened to water touching stone and stone returning the sound. He was not alone. Across the lake, shapes stood near the far reeds, not distinct, not hidden, present in the way mountains are present when seen through mist. No voice reached him, no gesture followed. The fisherman understood that attention was enough. He remained until the stars overhead finally matched those in the water. When he stood, his legs felt steady, his thoughts felt lighter. He returned home without marking the path. In the days that followed, he spoke less. When he did speak, his words carried weight without effort. He slept deeply and woke without urgency. The lake returned to him in dreams, not as an image, but as a feeling of being unburdened. Others asked him where he had gone that evening. He could not say. The way no longer existed in his mind as a series of turns. It remained only as a sense of arrival. Years passed. The fisherman aged. He walked more slowly and rested more often. Yet whenever he passed near the forest's edge, he felt oriented, as though something had quietly agreed to hold his place in the world. Some say the Sidhe still gather at the lake. Others say they never did. The lake does not answer such questions. It reflects what is offered and releases the rest. If you ever find yourself there, you may feel the urge to sit, to remain, to allow the world to continue without your guidance. The lake will not ask anything of you. It never has. At the place where the forest thins into open land, there stands an old boundary. Not a wall, not a fence, just a gradual change. Trees growing farther apart, grass lying flatter, the sky pressing closer to the ground. This was where the owl lived. Its nesting place was high in a pine that had lost its top to wind many years before. The broken crown had hardened with time, and the hollow beneath it had become a place of return. Each evening, the owl awoke before the last light faded. It did not rush from its rest. It opened one eye, then the other, and measured the air. The owl had lived long enough to know that night did not arrive all at once. There was always a moment, brief but complete, when the world belonged to neither day nor darkness. The owl claimed this moment. From its place in the pine, it watched the light drain from the fields and gather between the trees. Shadows lengthened, then lost their shape. Colors retreated until only form remained. The owl turned its head slowly, listening. Not for movement, but for balance. It listened for the sound of animals settling, for the final calls of birds that belonged to the sun. It listened for the ground itself to change its tone. When something lingered too long, when light clung stubbornly to the land, the owl waited. It did not intervene. It believed that patience was part of its task. Once, in a season remembered by few, the balance failed. The sun dipped below the hills, yet the world did not release it. The fields remained pale, the forest held a thin glow. Night hesitated. Creatures stirred without certainty. Some emerged too early, others did not emerge at all. The owl sensed the strain in the way sound traveled. It called once, not loudly, not sharply, just enough to mark the boundary. The sound moved across the thinning light and settled into the land. The glow dimmed. The air shifted. Darkness arrived as something accepted, not imposed. From that night on, the owl was said to guard the edge. Not as a ruler, not as a force, but as a witness. Years passed. The pine weathered further, branches fell, new trees grew nearby. The owl remained. Its feathers lightened with age. Its movements became economical, each turn measured. Travelers passing near the boundary sometimes stopped without knowing why. They felt that they had reached a place where forward and backward held equal weight. Some rested there, some slept. The owl watched them without judgment. It understood that rest was part of passage. When the owl finally left the pine, no sound marked its going. The tree remained, the boundary remained. Night continued to arrive in its own time. Some say another owl took its place. Others say the land no longer needs one. Both may be true. The edge still exists, not as a line, but as a moment. And each night, whether noticed or not, the world crosses it. There is a stone in the old lands that does not draw attention to itself. It does not rise higher than the others. It does not bear marks or symbols. It sits where the ground dips slightly, as if it has always been there and expects nothing else. Those who pass it often do not notice it at all. Others feel drawn to stop without knowing why. The stone does not change when this happens. It rests at the crossing of two old paths. Neither path is used often now. Grass grows between their lines. Small flowers settle where feet once pressed. Yet the paths remain, held in place by memory rather than movement. The stone has been there longer than names, before villages formed, before stories were told to explain the dark. It learned the weight of rain before it learned the sound of voices. When the first travelers rested beside it, they did not speak. They placed a hand on its surface and felt the steadiness of something that did not move through time in the same way they did. The stone did not listen as a person listens. It did not gather words, it gathered presence. Each person who rested there left something behind. Not an object, not a thought, a trace, the way warmth lingers after a body rises. The stone held these traces without confusion. It did not separate them. It did not compare them. It carried them as the ground carries footsteps long after rain has passed. Generations came and went. Some travelers sat beside the stone at dusk. Others arrived in the early hours of morning. Some stayed only long enough to rest their back and close their eyes. Many fell asleep, not because they were tired, but because the effort of holding themselves together eased while they were there. The stone did not protect them. It did not offer comfort. It simply remained. Over time, people began to say that the stone remembered names, not spoken names, but the deeper ones, the names carried beneath habit and role, the names no one else used. Those who sat beside it sometimes felt recognized, not seen, not examined, recognized, as if the world had acknowledged their existence without asking them to explain it. The stone did not follow those who left, yet many carried the feeling with them. They walked differently. They rested more easily. Some returned years later and sat again, older, changed. The stone received them as it had before, without correction, without surprise. Storms passed, the land shifted, trees grew and fell nearby. The storm remained, settling deeper into the earth, becoming more itself. In later times, fewer people walked the old paths. The grass grew taller, the crossings softened. Yet the stone did not lose its place. Those who still find it often do so by accident. They stop, they sit, they breathe. Some stay awake, some sleep. The stone does not distinguish between the two. It remembers them all the same. If you were to sit beside it now, there would be no moment of arrival, no signal, just the sense that you are allowed to rest exactly as you are. The stone would not ask your name. It already knows how you stand in the world. And when you rise, when you leave the crossing behind, the stone will remain, holding the land together in small, unseen ways, just as it always has.